All right, here we are on day 2 of Species in an Ecosystem, page 314, Biomagnification. Go ahead and say that, Biomagnification. So to magnify is to make things bigger, but we're talking about bio or biology. So something's being made bigger in biology. Biomagnification. Nutrients and energy are passed from one organism to another in a food chain. Nutrients and energy pass through food chain. Some toxins or poisons are not broken down by natural processes. Toxins as well, parentheses, poisons, not always broken down. Instead, the toxin stays in the body of organisms that absorb or eat them. When these organisms are eaten, the toxin is passed on up the food chain. The toxins concentrate in animals, including humans, at the top of the food chain. Concentrate at top of food chain. They receive the entire amount of toxin from all the lower levels. Entire amount. This effect is called biomagnification. Practice saying that. Biomagnification. Biologist Rachel Carson, 1907 to 1964, was one of the first scientists to observe and describe biomagnification. She observed it happening with DDT, a powerful insecticide used to kill mosquitoes. DDT equals insecticide to kill mosquitoes. Carson showed that DDT traveled up the food chain, harming birds and other animals. She published her work in a book titled Silent Spring. Thanks to Carson's work, large-scale use of DDT is banned worldwide. However, some scientists argue that DDT should be allowed limited use in certain circumstances. Mosquitoes spread malaria, a deadly disease, and DDT effectively kills mosquitoes. Okay, using this picture here, we did mosquitoes, even though they're not in the picture, but that's what they talked about in the book. Arrow, small fish, because the small fish eat the mosquitoes. Small fish includes the tiny fish. And then those get eaten by the big fish. And then those get eaten by the eagles. Now, looking here, natural processes do not break down the insecticide DDT, modeled here by red dots. You can see the little red dots in there. Use of DDT is banned worldwide today. DDT in a food chain. So, the tiny fish eat the little zooplankton, and they also sometimes eat mosquito or mosquito larvae, like their eggs or their little, like the baby mosquitoes basically. And they get a little bit of that DDT. Well, that DDT, again, does not get broken down. So when the small fish eat the tiny fish, it concentrates. Instead of 1 dot, they're getting like 3 dots. Right? And then the big fish eat them, so more DDT concentrates. And then the eagles eat them, so more DDT concentrates. And when it gets concentrated enough up here at the top of this food chain, animals start dying because it's a toxin or a poison. All right, which animals in a food web are most affected by biomagnification? Well, let's look at it. If you only have 1 dot down here and you get more dots at the top, the animals in a food web that are most affected by biomagnification are the animals at the top of the food chain. Remember? Because the toxin or the poison concentrates at the top of the food chain. Those apex predators, those secondary and third level consumers, get the entire amount of the toxin or the poison, and so they end up being the ones who die. All right, now, phase 2, processing, highlighting, annotating, looking for key details that support the main idea. Main idea: every species in an ecosystem has a niche, which includes the species' relationships with the biotic and abiotic factors in the ecosystem. Use the visual summary. Each species in an ecosystem has a specific role or niche. Okay, so talking about the role or the niche, there we go. Every species has one. Next line, all species depend on other species for survival. Oh, so they have relationships. Species in different biomes may fill similar niches. So what they're trying to say is, like in a desert biome, there will be an animal, and then in a taiga biome, there will be an animal that have similar niches. So a good example would be like tortoises and turtles. There are tortoises and turtles in the desert, in the forests, in the rivers, in the oceans, and they all fill similar niches even though they're in different biomes. Okay, let's see what else. So let's go down the list here. Anything about species and niches and relationships. Carnivores and herbivores, there's the vocabulary word, niche, right? Predator and prey is one type of relationship. Carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores, that tells us their niche, what they do, what they eat, or what eats them. That's a title of an entire section. We need to highlight that. A niche is a role. It includes things like where they live, how they raise their young, or what they eat. There's that predator versus prey again. What else? Generalist or specialist. Those are important words to know. Generalists are like raccoons. They have a broad niche, or they can do a lot of things. But specialists have a very specific niche, or they're like the warblers who only eat in one area of a tree, or they only raise their young in a certain type of tree. If creatures, this goes in with the relationships, right? If creatures have the same niche, then they have to compete with each other. And whichever is most successful is the one that's going to survive. That's evolution right there. Okay. Food webs illustrate the feeding relationships among the many species of an ecosystem. Okay, so here again comes the predator-prey, the carnivore, herbivore, omnivore. Okay, let's flip over to food webs. Highlight that. A food web is made up of producers, herbivores, carnivores, and decomposers. Okay, let's highlight those. Producers, those are the plants and algae using the sun's energy to produce sugars and energy and nutrients. Herbivores, eating the plants. Carnivores, eating other animals. Omnivores, eating all of the above. And decomposers, breaking everything down to return nutrients back into the soil for producers to use again. Food webs are basically the feeding relationships. Okay, what else? I think that's about it for the food webs. Now, we see this picture. Hey, that's the biomagnification, so highlight that. When toxic substances in the environment are passed up a food chain, biomagnification occurs. So it includes toxins or poisons. They pass through the food chain, and they can concentrate at the top of the food chain. That's biomagnification. The top predators harmed the most. Okay, so here, let's highlight the eagle and the poor little skull and bones, cross eyes, because they get hurt the most. All right, now we can put our yellow highlighter away, get our red pen, and use our brain to do the same thing. So every species in an ecosystem has a niche, which includes its relationships with biotic and abiotic factors. Okay, well, let's see. Species are important. We don't see that word a lot here, though, because we're supposed to kind of already know what that is. Niche or niche, that's very important. Highlight that. And what is that? It's its role. Things like where it lives, how it raises its young, or what it eats. Predator-prey relationships, whether or not something is a generalist or a specialist, and if they have to compete, the most successful will survive. Okay, food webs. Food webs show those relationships, and every food web has all these components: producer, herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, and decomposer. So all 5 of those components are in every food web. Biomagnification, that basically means that toxins or poisons can concentrate at the top of the food chain. So toxins or poisons concentrate at the top of the food chain. Okay, so when you write your summary paragraph, you're going to talk about the niche, how it's a creature's or a species' role in an ecosystem, and that includes things like where it lives, how it raises its young, or what it eats. And you might decide to talk about predator-prey, you might decide to talk about generalist versus specialist, or you might decide to say something about how when they compete, the most successful species will survive. When you talk about food webs, you need to say those are the feeding relationships between those 5 components. Every food web has all of them. And when you talk about biomagnification, you need to talk about how toxins or poisons can concentrate at the top of the food chain and harm the apex predator. Okay, phase 3, connecting what's in your brain and can connect to this. Again, what you know is not written on this piece of paper. What you know is inside your brain. It's related to this, but it is not written down. It is inside your brain. And then what do you predict? Make a prediction. Knowing all this stuff now, learning all this new stuff, what kind of prediction can you make about niches, about competition, about generalists and specialists, about food webs and the effects on food webs if one of these components were to disappear or if humans were to mess things up? What about biomagnification? What kind of prediction can you make about the future and how we're going to handle this problem as humans? Then your phase 4 summary paragraph, and you'll be done for the week. Okay, persevere, have a growth mindset, and roar, Wildcats.